It was a quiet night on Route 17, one of those nights when the only sound that could break through the darkness was the low hum of neon lights flickering against the coal. Inside Rusty's diner, the clock above the counter ticked lazily toward midnight. The booths were mostly empty, but for a few weary truckers and a small group of Hells Angels tucked away in the far corner. Their leather jackets caught the dull glow of the diner's tired lights, each patch reflecting stories from the road. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions, while a dusty jukebox hummed softly, blending with the faint sound of cooling motorcycle engines outside. In the midst of bikers sat Marcus Steele, broad-shouldered, silver-bearded, and calm in a manner that made people instinctively lower their voices. He wasn't the man who sought attention, though he still carried with him that silent type of authority which was respected without words. Marcus had seen the worst of He'd looked into the eyes of men who believed fear was power, and he'd survived enough battles to recognize the face of real cruelty when he saw it. But that night, something else caught his eye, something small and fragile, far more unsettling than any fight he'd been in. Behind the counter moved Lena Brooks, night cook and part-time waitress. She moved quietly, her uniform neat but faded, her motions precise and cautious. Every time she smiled at a customer, her lips trembled slightly, as if even showing kindness had become dangerous. Then Marcus saw it, the bruise, a dark, ugly mark at the corner of her lip, not from a fall or an accident, but the kind of mark that carries along a story of silence, fear, and nights spent pretending that everything is fine. Marcus watched her for a long moment, the flickering neon sign outside painting red and blue across his face. He'd seen bruises like that before on his sister, years ago, before she finally ran from the man who broke her. The thought made something old and angry stir inside him. But this wasn't a fight in a bar or an ambush on the road. This was different. This was quiet suffering, the kind most people ignored, because it wasn't loud enough to make them uncomfortable. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for others, like this video, share it with someone who still believes that good people exist, and subscribe to our channel. What happens next will remind you that real strength isn't about fists, it's about heart. As the hours passed, Marcus noticed more, how Lena flinched every time the phone rang, the way her hand instinctively touched her lip whenever a car pulled into the parking lot. Then, just before closing, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside the diner. In an instant, the air shifted and was heavy, uneasy. Lena froze. Her face turned pale. Through the glass door, Marcus saw him, a man in his mid-40s, wearing a mechanic's jacket with anger burning in his eyes. He stormed inside, slamming the door so hard the jukebox skipped. "Where the hell have you been?" He shouted loud enough for all to hear. The diner had fallen completely silent. Lena whispered, "I'm working, Tom." But Tom Harris, her boyfriend, grabbed her wrist so hard that the plate she was holding slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The crash echoed through the diner, and every head turned. He yanked her close, his voice dripping with venom. Marcus's hand tightened around his coffee cup until the ceramic cracked in his grip. He stood up slowly, every eye in the diner following his every move. His heavy boots echoed against the tiled floor as he walked toward the counter. Tom turned, his anger suddenly twisting into a sneer. "This ain't your business, old man." Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped between them, unhurried, steady and immovable. His voice was low, yet carrying the weight to make the room seem to shrink in size. "She's working," he said, "and you're leaving." Those were not a suggestion, but a command. Tom laughed cynically, veiling his fear, which flickered behind his eyes. "You don't know who you're talking to." Marcus leaned in closer, his voice quiet, his eyes cold as steel. "No," he said, "you don't." For one long moment, nobody inside the diner stirred. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fall silent. Then Tom tried to shove past him. Marcus caught his arm, his grip firm, unyielding. "You ever touch her again," Marcus said, voice barely above a whisper, "and I'll make sure you never raise that hand again." The diner had frozen in stunned silence. Tom ripped his arm free, his pride wounded deeper than his skin. Without another word, he stormed out into the night, the sound of his SUV screeching down the road breaking the stillness. Lena was standing behind the counter, trembling. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. Marcus turned to her, his voice soft now. "You're safe," he said simply. She tried to smile, but instead, tears slipped down her cheeks. The other bikers, one by one, rose from their seats. They didn't say a word. They simply helped, gathering the broken pieces of the shattered plate, cleaning up spilled coffee, returning quiet dignity to this instant. There were no words. There was respect. Everything changed from that night onwards. The following evening, Marcus's crew returned not to intimidate, but to protect. They filled Rusty's diner with the sounds of laughter and warmth, music from an old jukebox that had been silent for far too long. They tipped generously, made sure Lena never closed up alone, and waited each night until she locked the doors before riding off into the dark. Little by little, the fear faded away from her eyes. She began to wear brighter lipstick again, hummed along with her favorite songs as she wiped the counter clean. And when one new customer asked her about the bruise, she just smiled softly and said, "It's gone for good." Weeks turned into months. Rusty's diner got a new name, the Angel's Stop, not because it was run by bikers, but because it was protected by them. In that little diner, Lena found peace surrounded by people who didn't just eat there, but stood for her. Marcus never mentioned that night again, but every time he saw Lena smile without fear, he knew he'd done something that mattered. Before this video ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever stood up for someone when it wasn't easy? Or has anyone ever stood up for you when that was what was needed? And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the deepest of wounds can be healed by a little bit of kindness and courage, please hit that like button, share the story with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe for more real-life stories proving humanity still lives in small acts of bravery. Because that night, at some lonely roadside diner, a Hell's Angel didn't just stop a man from hurting a woman. He helped her remember what it feels like to be safe again. And sometimes, that is all it takes to change a life forever.